Okay, so good morning, good day, and good evening to everyone. I think people are maybe still joining in, but I will start slowly and people can still join us while I welcome everyone. So my name is Annika Wilmers from DIF in Frankfurt in Germany, and together with Rose Wilimaki from Northern Arizona University and the German Center for Research and Innovation in New York, I would like to welcome you all to this session on education and sustainability tonight. We are delighted to see you all here for our transatlantic discussion on important topics, on the important topic of sustainability and related issues such as teaching the climate crisis, preparing students for the future, student protest movements, and other urgent topics that we are going to hear about today. Today's event is the second event in a three-part series on contested public education, pedagogical conceptions, and sustainable innovations. We had a first panel discussion in January on critical race theory and culturally sensitive pedagogy, and we will have a third event on digitization and education at the end of March. When we set up the series, our idea was that it's helpful to explore urgent topics in education from a comparative perspective, that this gives us a chance to learn from each other's insights, and that it broadens the perspective on topics that are relevant not just in single countries, but on a global scale. We are very grateful that we can organize these sessions together with the German Center for Research and Innovation in New York, which is collaborating with us on this project. We worked with the DWIH before on several occasions and see this opportunity as an ideal frame to address questions that are of high relevance both for the US and for Germany, and to address questions of knowledge transfer between research and practice in education. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Julia Helms.
Thank you so much, Annika. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm the program officer at the German Center for Research and Innovation, New York. We are one of 6 centers around the globe with locations in Sao Paulo, Tokyo, San Francisco, Moscow, and New Delhi. We are managed by the DAD, the German Academic Exchange Service out of Bonn, and so it is our pleasure to be hosting a 3-part series on education, particularly this event on education and sustainability. With that, it is my pleasure to hand the virtual mic over to our moderator, Dr. Frances Julia Reamer. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm getting used to WebEx, so I'm doing my best. I feel like I'm pressing mute and not sure whether I'm muting or unmuting. It's lovely to see everybody. I am so honored and really excited to moderate this panel. This is a topic that's near and dear to my own heart. And so my first job is to introduce the panelists that we'll have for today. We have Dr. Katja Brundiers, a clinical assistant professor at the School of Sustainability, College of Global Futures at Arizona State University, my sister university down south, with a doctorate degree in sustainability science. Dr. Brundiers explores how to design professional education that integrates education for sustainable development and disaster management, seeking to reduce disaster risk while advancing sustainability and resilience. She explores how key competencies in sustainability can be fostered through whole person and project-based courses in collaboration with practitioners. And she researches how individuals bring about change for sustainability in disaster contexts. Dr. Brundiers has conducted research in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, New Zealand, as well as in Puerto Rico, and here in my home state, Arizona, USA. We have Dr. Lydia Katter-Wetstadt, who holds an administrative professorship for education for sustainability development, for sustainable development and basic and social sciences at the Leuphana University. She's got a background in linguistics, physical education, and secondary school teaching, all of which inform her work. Her core interest in teaching and research is to support teachers develop a profound idea of future-oriented learning, which empowers children to discover the world from different points of view and to help students actively develop their relationships to others and the world. She's currently an editorial board member of the International Journal of Educational Research and Development and serves as co-convener in the network Environmental and Sustainability Education Research. We have Dr. Erin Redmond, who's the director of the Educational Sustainability Doctoral Program and the Graduate Certificate in Education for Equity and Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Prior to joining the University of Wisconsin, Erin worked at Leuphana University, Lüneburg in Germany, leading a collaboration among faculty and educators in Ireland, Mexico, Germany, and the US to scale a sustainability professional development model for in-service teachers. She also worked as a professor at the National University of Mexico, where she developed sustainability undergraduate courses and programs. And finally, we have Dr. Katrin Valentin, who's the Senior Research Assistant and Study Manager for Education for Sustainable Development at the Center for Teacher Education at the University of Erlangen, Nuremberg. Currently, she's working on the Erasmus Plus project, Climate PD, at the Innovation and Learning Institute, and in the teaching project, Education for Sustainable Development in Geosciences, at the Northern Bavaria Geocenter. Her research interests span various fields of pedagogical action, with a focus on education for sustainable development, media education, school development and aesthetic education, and child and youth work. It's a very rich panel, and we're very excited to hear what they have to say to us. So we're going to start with an opening statement from each of the panelists, and then we have a few questions that we've developed, and we'll have time for questions from all of you as well. So let's turn it over to the panelists for their opening statements. Katja, do you want to begin?
I think Lydia is going to begin.
Oh, Lydia is going to begin. Okay.
I could start. Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Lydia.
Francis, for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to discuss with all the experts on ESD, and I was thinking about the opportunities and obstacles of ESD and implementing ESD on different levels in the education system. So at least, why are we here? Why is ESD important? I think ESD helps to focus at least on essential questions in their complexity and interconnectedness, and in their relevance for a just and sustainable future. Two, it provides didactic solutions or reflections on how we can enable learning with regard to sustainable development. Obstacles are, which I think are very important to mention, is that we need, if we implement ESD, we need to reflect on whom to address in which responsibility. And thus, what narratives of development we provide, which help to question the unsustainability of the structures we are having at the moment. So I think that's not an easy question to solve. So I'm happy to discuss that further on. Thank you.
Next, our next panelist. Katja, are you going next? I keep wanting you to go, apparently.
Sure. So thanks for the nice introduction. I wanted to maybe add one element to this introduction, because sustainability is a science, but it's also a practice for individuals, for us as communities. And in this regard, I think as a person embedded in academia, I also have a responsibility to be embedded in place in the communities we try to collaborate and serve. And in this sense, I'm serving on the local sustainability commission of my city, the city of Tempe in Arizona. And in this one, I have the opportunity to create a bridge between the city and the university and provide real-world learning opportunities for students in a particular partnership where the city and the university acquired together a grant to empower youth, develop youth councils, with the idea to enable these youth councils to have a seat at the decision-making table of the city, bring science, but also bring their lived experience to those decisions around climate action and mitigation of extreme heat. And that's maybe building off of Lydia's statement. I wanted to reinforce what she was saying, that through such work we can adopt a solution-oriented approach to the work we are doing, And we really try to take all aspects from sustainability into account, the social, the environmental, and the economic. We ground the social, we lead with the social justice approach. We link the individual, the youth to the place, but also to a global conversation, because these issues are global. And we try to understand what's going on and where we want to go through a historical perspective that looks into the future. And later in the panel, I can speak about some of the competencies that we hope to convey and use to support this process of developing solutions to to complex sustainability problems.
Thank you.
I maybe stop it here and pass it on to the next panelist.
Great, Erin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm very excited about this topic, and educating for sustainability certainly been my life's passion. What I'm going to talk about in terms of the opportunities and obstacles is going to be focused on my current role in the Educational Sustainability Doctoral Program. And what I think is one great opportunity is how broadly the term education can be used and applied. So in the doctoral program, we see education for sustainability is not confined to K-12 schools or to universities. We have educators that are librarians, that are at museums, that are at zoos. We even have a counselor that's at a prison. So by supporting all of these avenues of education, we can get sustainability out to a large number of learners and a diverse audience. And that's a great opportunity to really empower these voices and empower these educators. And through giving them this research opportunity, they can say things like, I had a doctoral student that just graduated. She works at the Ho-Chunk Indigenous Arts and Science Institute, and she can say, my research demonstrates the importance of indigenizing curriculum for all students and implemented by all teachers. And that empowerment is a really important part of educating for sustainability. Now, I'll say that the obstacles are grand as well. My students feel overburdened and under-respected. So they come into the class and they say, I'm really passionate about this. I want to do this. Why does nobody respect my voice as a counselor at the Rock County Prison? So I think we need to bring up respect and professionalism back to that arena, back to educating for sustainability, and back into the hands of those educators to really support them as change agents and foster this broad, positive, solutions-oriented change and action.
Thank you. Katrine, do you want to finish up the panel?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I'm also very glad that I can be here. At my university, I help lecturers to familiarize themselves with ESD. They're not so enthusiastic like you got people with you. But I help them to further develop their expertise. In doing so, I'm able to illuminate an aspect of ESD that is very important to me. It's similar to what you just said, it's interdisciplinarity. For the transformation of our societies towards sustainable societies, it is necessary that a group of actors enter into real encounters. The same applies to teaching. The different disciplines must cross-fertilize each other's logic of action, in my point of view. As Francis just mentioned, I work with geoscientists, and I develop seminar formats in which students are asked to deal with their feelings when it goes about deposit formation of oil. You know, we really change how they work. And I organize events with university teachers, and they learn about hidden theater or the so-called political plant. And that's what I really enjoy about ESD. Research-wise, you just mentioned it in our ESD lab, we're currently addressing the question of what factors positively motivate to ESD. In doing so, I have the good fortune to be able to negotiate this question internationally in the Erasmus Plus project, Climate PD. And there I'm working with Bulgaria and Turkey, Greece, and Spain, and I'm learning a lot. So I'm very excited to learn about USA here today. And because you learn so much about yourself if you really meet the others and the way of the others. And in Bulgaria, for example, it still need to be discussed whether climate change actually exists. And in Greece and Spain, the forest fires are raging so much that ESD mainly deals with health issues. And I really had to realize, where are we standing? So we're somewhere in between. And I'm very excited about what I will learn now and how you implement ESD, and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I need to apologize to the panel. Apparently you told me in the chat what order we were speaking, and I just opened up the chat now, so my apologies. So I'm very excited by those statements. Thank you very much. One of the questions perhaps we all have is, can we take a slightly deeper dive into what's going on in schools now, around sustainability, around education for sustainability, both at the K-12 and the tertiary level? What are we seeing? Maybe give us some examples that might help us be excited, perhaps. Who would like to start? Erin, you want to start?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure.
So with the COVID pandemic, what we saw was this destabilization that happens typically with disasters. And we see that in our K-12 as well as our higher ed systems. But I'm going to focus a little on K-12 for my examples here. So with this disruption, we kind of came back with a different point of view, with a different way to balance learning and teaching. And it's a change, and change is good, but change has made some people very uncomfortable. And so there's a retaliation against this change, particularly in the US and our K-12 schools. So what we're seeing is teachers are embracing different ways of teaching. They're integrating hybrid and online and e-learning with in-person. And then there are people pushing back and saying, no, when there are these e-learning days, our teachers are just slacking off. And so while this change is good, we have, e-readers that help students that are blind. We have really great books now. I have 2 checked out that are for students that read with Braille. So we're really developing more inclusive pedagogies, in part because of this destabilization, but there's a huge reactive pushback against it. And I would say that this also relates to the social justice and equity focus that was talked about in the first session. So here in Stevens Point, we had a teacher that wore a Black Lives Matter bracelet to her classroom, and there were protesters outside the school saying that she was brainwashing the kids. And so this is what we're seeing in our classrooms. One step forward and then a reaction against that.
Thanks.
Perhaps I can go next and give a little bit more insights into the German system and the implementation process at that point. At least I think it's very good to know. Erin was very action related. I would try to provide a little bit more systemic view, perhaps, that we have a quite good implementation in the curricula right now with regard to school systems. So in the overall goals, ESD is implemented in our curricula. That's quite good. So quite comfortable situation at the end. But we do see that there is the challenge to transfer the idea into the schools. I think in primary level, that's that the COVID crisis, also what Erin mentioned, we do have a kind of pushback because the orientation is on writing skills and mathematics, and we try to tend like not providing the complex questions which are really important to talk about with the children. So that's also quite challenging situation that we have there at the moment. And with regard to secondary or K-12 in general, perhaps, I think the most challenging point is that ESD is inter and transdisciplinary, let's say, and we have a really strict subject orientation, and trying to prepare students for their exams and all that stuff. And they are saying, okay, projects are perhaps not that helpful with regard to having a good exam at the end. So the challenges that we see is especially the interdisciplinarity that we have in sustainability issues for teachers, at least, to implement it. So I think at the end, the question is also for schools, how do we, I think most of them, especially with regard to Fridays for Future movement, etc., are open to implement project days like singular events, let's say, but they really struggle how we can organize and systematically implement that in the school everyday practice. And I think that's the challenge that we face at the moment. And I mean, even with regard to the actual situation now with the Ukraine, I mean, that's also influencing me a bit at the moment. And I'm really, I'm really moved by that development. So just to put that into the discussion as well, because I think at least this is the question that we need to raise with regards to sustainable development, right? How can we keep freedom? How, all that stuff. So peace, freedom, democracy, perhaps, so far at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that forward. Certainly, we're all very, very troubled and concerned this morning. So
Maybe I will add something from the German point of view.
Great.
Of course, I fully agree with Lydia. Yes, it's true. And we have one subject, which is geography, which really helps which is doing enough. It's a main actor at school. But as she said it's knowledge transfer and it's project, what often happens. They are trying it. Many federal states are having programs like Future School, Environmental School, and things like this. And they would like to do the whole institution approach, but they do not have the situation to be able to. It simply depends on special teachers, single persons who say, this is, how did you say it? It's my life theme, there, my heart bumps. And then there are several examples which are simply great. I would like to talk about the Emily Wüstenfeld Gymnasium, because in this, in addition to a climate protection plan, they made the climate protection plan with the students together. They had also undertaken a climate study group, and they made a survey among the pupils and on the subject of eating habits. I don't know if it's also in your in the States the same, that nutrition is a big issue for the children who would like to be more aware of climate change. They also have a deposit collection box and the trial introduction of carbon dioxide measuring devices in some classrooms. So, and there are examples which are simply great, but that's not the normal case. As Lydia said, they're all struggling, of course, of COVID, but also because of the structures which are not helpful for interdisciplinary work, or taking the students as learners who really face the big issues in their life and not only fulfilling programs.
Yeah.
Maybe building on this round, I can kind of add the higher education perspective. And there I have 3 points. One is with regards to the experience of individual learners, our students, and we see really the rise of the importance of thinking about sustainability through the lens of environmental intersectionality, because that's where the individual student can connect to the broader processes, as intersectionality connects the individual to the global and looks at systems of oppressions and how these systems of oppressions like capitalism, patriarchy, racism, and colonialism, how they then interact with individual experiences and identity formations through gender, age, race, and ethnic identities. And we have, in Dr. Sonja Klinsky, we have a wonderful professor who co-created this course with the students to make sure learning objectives are really negotiated from both sides. And I think it is an illustration of sustainability education as a practice where participation is also in the design of courses. And then another element that we see is we are speaking today about the climate crisis generally. And Erin, you spoke about, the pandemic. And this is increasingly an issue for universities as well. How do we respond to crisis? And we see a lot of responses emerging with, for example, with the crisis in Afghanistan and universities taking on students and staff from universities in Afghanistan. We are in this right now. The same happened after Hurricane Maria, devastating Puerto Rico and other Caribbean islands. And thanks to a partnership between universities, we were able to make sure that students can continue their education despite this disruption that often continues for years, even when the formal disaster recovery is over. And so I think for universities and for schools in general, it's really a question, what do we do with these recurring emergencies? How do we provide education in times of continuous disruptive change? And how can we move beyond a response to really work with communities, with our partners, to co-create solutions, but centering the students and their ability to continue their formal and informal education. And then the last point I see in higher education is also more on a global level. There I have the opportunity to work in the Global Council for Science and the Environment, GCSE, and they work on two strands, which represent what was discussed just in this round. One is that as an organization committed to science and education, they also committed to being an anti-racist organization and really enable and advance practices that support access, diversity, and inclusion in sustainability programs in higher education, because these programs are dominated by white and Western approaches to science and to education, and also by people who represent this. And so that is an important stream of development that I think is now gaining more depth. And then second, this organization also has witnessed the dramatic increase of sustainability or sustainability related programs in community colleges and universities in the US, but also worldwide. And that obviously then raises the question around quality assurance and comparability. And with this in mind, they are working together with all their members to try to co-create a pathway towards accreditation of those programs, and thinking about what are really the key competencies that graduates from those programs could develop and contribute to society in this effort of global sustainability problem solving. And I think that provides a lot of benefits for students. It gives clarity what the programs will offer them, what they can contribute to employers, and obviously also for us in the programs, how we can organize our courses and curricula with regards to some of those learning outcomes. And I will put in the chat a link, because this idea of connecting the work on the Sustainable Development Goals with competencies that are needed to help us make progress towards these globally identified goals is being developed by the UNESCO and UNITA, and I invite all of you to explore this and contribute to this effort. Thank you so much, and I hand it back to Frances for the moderation.
Thank you. I see some clap. I see some applause. It's refreshing to hear the words anti-racism and environmental justice in this conversation. Often in the U.S., we house these conversations in biology and in the hard sciences, and so we've been late to this notion of environmental justice, and I so appreciate that is part of the conversation from the beginning. So thank you. Our second question is a nice flow from the first. You've talked about what's happening in education, and I'm wondering what's happening in terms of the students. We hear a lot about young people taking the lead. So what are you seeing? What are you engaged in terms of student-led initiatives?
Perhaps I can start with regard to that question, if you like.
Great. Sure. Thank you, Lydia.
Because I'm also engaged in Scientists for Future, for example, where we try to support Fridays for Future movement with a scientific background, let's say, or scientific expertise. So we do had some connections, discussions with young people trying to be engaged in their community. And perhaps what the question for me is on the one hand, we had the discussion, you know, they have the Friday off and they are not taking school and all that stuff. So is that allowed at the end? Should we allow for disengagement or for disengagement? And on the other hand, I feel it's more a kind of success that we see in with regard to political engaged youth. So they have seen opportunities, how they can give them a voice, or how they can voice themselves, or provide their position, or yeah, their views on things in the public. I think that's really a different quality that we have now with Fridays for Future. I think they have, and it was a global movement, so that was really, really supportive, I feel, also for sustainability science, for education, for sustainability. We don't need to discuss anymore why this is important, because the youth are asking for it. And on the other hand, I said it's a success that they are demonstrating, that they are engaging and all that stuff. And on the other hand, it shows us that schools are not providing the answers they need, or they are not providing the spaces they want. So which is very important, or for me, a very important movement here in Germany. I'm not sure if that is globally transferred, but we had an initiative which is called Free Friday. So a lot of schools try to take the idea of investing the Friday for questions the students decide for. They can choose. It's quite open space, and only where we really just provide spaces where students can discuss things or explore things or whatever, and they are free to choose what they want to do. And I feel that's very important to think about these spaces that we provide in school. What kind of learning should happen there? And especially, I have not mentioned the situation higher ed here in Germany. This is also very challenging because we are not providing this open space. We are very kind of curricular oriented, and we don't have much time with the students. So I think it's both a development question for schools on the one hand, but also for university at the other hand. So yeah, perhaps only a short insight on that for Germany.
Yeah, maybe I can continue on that point. Lydia just said we haven't to discuss why ESD is important. Please come to my Bavarian ministry and you will wonder a little how long you can discuss this. Yes, I am also engaged in Scientists for Future and in Families for Future, and I work a lot with the Fridays, and I learned so much. And you made this gesture just like, and that's how we are in our academic world, you know, and they really tear that open. And I have a lot of respect for them. That's really what I feel. And what I learned is speak and work with your heart and don't fulfill a program. And that's really an obstacle. If you want ESD to become more present everywhere, you have to make a program, you know, and a curriculum. But on the other side, it simply only works if you really do it with your whole heart and face emotionally the dilemmas we already are in and really dare this, which means to have courage to fear and just breathe with them and not, you cannot find a solution. There are parts in ESD, and it's very clear, we just have to do it. And there are parts in which, well, we have just a dilemma. And I learned to strengthen the backs of those who are right in matter, even if it seems completely impossible that their cause has a chance of success. This is what I learned from their strength. And give young people a lot of credit. I really must say, I make some events with them, with some scientists about special issues like the polar and glaciers, and they have the better questions than we scientists had, you know. And when the stakes are really high, it is incredible what they are capable of acquiring in terms of knowledge and skills. and to realize this with this future movement that's really accelerating. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's really wonderful, Katrin, how you said it. And I can build on this because I'm applying some of the insights that you are learning and sharing with us in this project where we work with the city and with youth councils and us as researchers. As an adult, I have to do a lot of unlearning and relearning exactly along the ways that you were outlining. And recognizing really the complementarity between a youth approach and an adult approach. Also partly because of our brains are now differently wired, we learn much slower. Youth is much more agile and quick and can think more comprehensively and holistically, and we are more linear already. And what opportunity that provides. You also spoke to the importance of respecting everyone's time and contributions in similar ways. And I think there's still sometimes a tendency that we think of professionals and young people when we do projects together, but that should not be this difference. And how do we connect actually as people, not as in our roles as students or activists or city staff or council members, but really as people who share a common cause, and that's what brought us together in this project. And these seem to be easy spoken words, but when we try to organize our meetings differently, to try to speak with each other differently, and to adjust, it is really an effort, and it requires a lot of reflection and conversations around this. And then the last piece is also that I'm often reminded how much my work is done through my computer. And when speaking with some of the young people who informed us how we should develop the approaches, we were reminded that a reason for having some legitimacy to speak about climate change action is also to have a lived experience and to know the place and know how people live in this place, and not just have kind of generic or indirect knowledge about it, but be also available on site to do work that is not just spoken work, but hands-on work, so that we can better address the tension between showing immediate changes that give hope while we are working on these longer term, very complex and highly contested political issues that have, as you said, maybe no chance of success, but nevertheless, we should keep trying to explore. So thank you for sharing this big overview with us.
Yeah.
Let me just quickly follow up. So I love what Katja mentioned in terms of, the youth and adult relationship and viewing the students as experts as well. And I think that in sustainability, there's a great opportunity for that. We were talking before we got on with the panel about youth seeing nutrition as a way to work with climate change. And when we bring this idea of food is sustainability, food is science, the kids can go out and look at what's in their grocery aisles, and they are experts. They come back and they're like, oh, I get science. It's all around me. It's not this theoretical, philosophical thing that isn't important to my life. It's my food. It's my diet. So that's really empowering, but I also wanted to say what I'm seeing is that students influence the teachers. So I have one student that is in Kansas, and she's running professional development on sustainability, and she has more teachers that want to participate in it than what she anticipated because the students are asking sustainability related questions. So then when the teachers see an opportunity, they seek it out because they want to have the answers. They want to have that discussion. They want to have the dialogue. But when students ask them questions about environmental justice or even climate science, they sometimes feel stumped. And so by providing these sustainability professional development opportunities, we're providing a solution, but also I love that it's coming from the youth, that it's driven from the youth.
Thank you. I love that notion of speak to the heart as well. That really strikes me, and that leads us to the next question. That often when we talk about climate change and we hear how fearful people are, how depressed people are. We in the States, we're constantly hearing about depression going up because people are so worried about climate change. So wondering how much how much of climate action is spurred by this sort of fear and anger? And how do we motivate positively to talk about, to work on these issues? How do we draw on what that sort of heart warmth that you were, and that sense of place that you all referenced before?
As I work on this question, maybe might I start? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Right now we are in the middle of the process, and we are trying to compile and systemize what ESD experts, what people who do ESD for a longer time, say what they personal positive motivations are. And it is absolutely amazing how broad these factors are and how empowering it can be to deal with it. And all of you mentioned some of these aspects when we were just talking. I think first was ethics, and essentiality. There are very important dimensions that the reference to meaningfulness, and that this sense of meaning is from enormous importance. This is one big category. Another is emotionality and aesthetics, as we just were talking about emotions. It's not only about, ESD is not only about imparting knowledge, but emotions play a very important role, and the aesthetic dimension lies across all other dimensions. The awe feeling, for example, of sublimity in an intact nature, or also in the deep realization of how we humans are more alike than we are different. These are feelings we get on. It's very fulfilling in in school or in academic circumstances to really get along with that and work with that. And of course, the transcendence and transformation, that's how we call the categories right now. In ESD, I can negotiate my own place in the world. And I develop a world reference and a ego reference, I realize where and how and what I am through really connecting to the others. And on with that goes that ESD has a process character. It is not clear how everything really develops. And I am all the time in developing myself. And this openness makes oneself come alive. And last but not least, we have the categories connectivity and self-efficiency. How to say efficiency? From the perspective of the experienced, ESD strengthens the sense of community. First, I thought it was only in the non-formal education, but it's also in the formal education, what the people tell us. And connected to this, also to influence the community and to experience oneself, it leads to self-effectiveness. For example, in a class, but also in relation to a global community. Yeah, and I just want to say that I'm very astonished that many people, I think in the beginning, many people are coming, if you talk about climate change, for example, they come from a thought, thinking about apocalypse. They're working out of fear or because there's big injustice in our world. And when they are longer in this process, it really it's not so important anymore, the fear fact. It really develops, and all the other categories I was talking about really come to their work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrin, for this overview. I mean, this is a very systematic one, and perhaps I can only add an individual one, which for me, the positive motivation is connectedness at the end. So really try to think about how and what kind of relations do we have with nature and with other humans in the world. So how do we relate, as you said, or how do we find our places in the world within structures that are really unsustainable? So for me, one point is to really reflect on our own needs. What do we really need? Because what we see is, you already mentioned health issues, right? We do see, especially in the Western context, a lot of people which are depressive, although they are in a very good situation. You know, it's not nutrition issues, it's not work, it's not money, it's not all that stuff, but they really feel emptiness, they really feel unconnected. And so I think if we want to have a health and sustainable future, I think we need to provide spaces where we are able to reorient on what we are as humans want to be like or exist like. And this is why we, for example, implement mindfulness-oriented approaches in teaching at the moment, and we want to support teacher students at the moment how to implement that in a primary school level, because I think that's really in the core or in the heart of what we do. What kind of narratives do we provide with regard to humans and nature? And I mean, that's our, you know, fundamentally important with regard to health, with everything. And we have unlearned what we really need. And I think that's perhaps one approach to really provide spaces to reflect on that and to have trust in ourselves that we, you know, can orient on what we really need, that not someone from the outside tells us what you have to need, what you have to buy next and all that stuff, you know, to really reorient on the essentials, what makes us as humans so important in the world, and not only a destructive power, but also be constructive and find a way through these structures. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just add briefly on top of what Lydia said. I think that what we gained through this solutions-oriented approach and this positive viewpoint instead of the negative fear is a better life, a better way, and a desire to make a better life. So we talk a lot about restorative pedagogy. So instead of kicking kids out of school, we're seeing meditation and we're seeing breaks in nature as a way to bring kids back into the classroom rather than expelling them. And that's better. It's a better model for education. And in connecting with nature, we are seeing experts that are focusing on like ecosomatics, where it's movement with nature and a movement connected to nature. And educators that are doing that through integrating Indigenous knowledge. And again, this is better. We're educating in new ways that improve the quality of our education system as well as the outcome for the learners. So I really think that there's a lot of positivity that can be gained through this interconnectedness that Lydia just talked about.
Yeah.
I think overall it invites us to, especially in higher education, to de-emphasize a little bit the cognitive dimension in order to make more space in the curriculum and in our teaching learning activities for the emotional, the social emotional, and also the more kind of applied dimension. And in Sustainability Education, they coin it sometimes to integrate the head, hands, and heart. And often really we emphasize so much the head alone. And from students we hear how important it is to reconcile a whole person approach. And I see this firsthand in my course on disasters and sustainability, where sometimes the anxiety about the future is really limiting or hindering the ability to engage with material and with each other. And add to this online learning, and in higher education we see an increase of development in online learning programs. And so I think for all of us it presents a challenge. How do you actually integrate head, hands, and heart in an online environment where we are even working together in asynchronous ways and often don't even see each other, speak with each other, because it's all done digitally. So I'm glad we spoke about the positivity, because we have lots of new challenges to address considering the trends in education. So I appreciate the kind of substantive hope you conveyed before. Thank you.
Me too. And the answers to that question shifted the conversation in a really wonderful and important way. So we had a question from the group that seems to follow very nicely, and perhaps you've already answered it, but it might prompt some other ideas, and I'm going to read. The main question we are discussing in my Engage Media class is, how do we best communicate the urgency of the climate crisis? We looked at the range from science to religion, from pessimism to optimism. What is your approach?
I can keep mine very short. I actually would rephrase the question that it's maybe less about communicating the urgency, because at least in the interactions I had with our youth council advisors, they know about the urgency in very existential ways. That's what drives them to do projects. I think what we as adults, or me, I can only speak for me, is what can I do to better demonstrate that I hear and understand the urgency in similar ways, and I do something to address it. And so, yeah, what is the accountability of my own work? So I would rephrase the question and turn it to myself as a self-reflective approach.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Lydia?
Yeah, perhaps I can add on that one, because I'm also with Katja saying, I think the urgency is quite clear. It's like everywhere. We do have sustainability science since 30 years communicating the urgency on every scale and every way. I don't know. I think that's perhaps not what helps us. And I do like, for example, the approach that one of my colleagues takes in the subject that Katrin already mentioned, the geography. And he developed a teaching book only focusing on sustainability solutions and trying to kind of analyze them and, you know, looking at them with regard to sustainability, which aspects do they already address and so on. Because if we really do a very systematic solution-oriented approach, we do have different issues popping up, you know, different themes and questions, disciplinary knowledge that becomes important then, because we do see, for example, some solutions are failing, you know, they are not so successful because of I don't know which aspect they have not addressed in their solutions. So I think that might be a very helpful way to not address this sustainability, but provide and analyze solutions that are already out there, because this is also empowering. This shows, okay, you are not alone. There are people out there being very active. They already try to solve things in different ways. And what way can you provide? What way can you add perhaps to that one or to that problem that really resonates with you, that you really want to address? So maybe this might be a solution, or it might be a way to approach that as well.
I would just briefly add that if the solutions can be things that aren't seen as sacrifices, but you talk about things like happiness and where are the synergies between happiness and well-being and the actions you can take to make you happier and healthier, and sustainability and climate solutions. So for example, we know with commuting that commuting in a car, the longer you commute every day, it negatively impacts your subjective well-being. So if you bike or actively commute or have a shorter commute, it improves your subjective well-being, but it's also a good climate solution. So trying to find those synergies is a nice way to communicate the topic, I feel.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so I would mention something more. Well, I feel the person who is asking this question. I'm in Bavaria, and you once more I can say, oh, meet my mayor of my hometown, and you will wonder once more how officially ruled persons can simply think that everything is good on its way. And I was thinking how the person who asked this question is meaning this question. How do we best communicate the urgency of the climate crisis? When you think about students, is this question about, okay, how do I make clear that it is very urgent, or how do I get along with this apocalypse, you know, and all these feelings? This is a question I'm thinking a lot about with younger students, you know, or children, and what they are facing. And well, if I would make a hint, I would say, first of all, you have to be aware of who you want to communicate with. What are their experiences in this field? What fears do they have? You know, if they are not aware of the urgency, that means something. There is a story behind. As Lydia and Katja just said, it is not the normal thing that the urgency is absolutely not aware. And what communication culture do they live in my school or in their families? This is important to be able to connect with them and then help them to develop information competence. And I would fully agree with what my previous speaker would say, you know, and just add this. And do not do it alone if you're in a school. Just do it with all your colleagues. So it has a system, you know, and you can not only talk about facts, yes, as you just said, that's one mistake we easily do if we are trying to talk about urgency. And maybe I would give a hint. It's the interactive atlas from the IPCC. Do you know this? Do some of you know this? You know, I really like it as an opportunity to you can visit it and you can see the different variables, how climate will change, whether we have the 1.5 or the 2 or the 4 degree scenario. And then you can think about, where does my food come from? Where do I like to make holidays and things like this, and be connected with the lives of the children and get aware of it, but only if you do it like Lydia said, and Katja and Erin, not to make fear, but to realize embedded in things what you can do and what makes your life happier, what brings it to yourself, and not, again, to fulfill a program.
Thank you. And Julia put the link to the IPCC
Thank you.
interactive atlas in the chat. Thanks. So our final question is, before we open it up for questions from the whole group, is a sort of wrap up. How do you all see the responsibilities of schools and educators in addressing sustainability and preparing our students for the future? How do we think about this as educators, however we're positioned?
Perhaps I can make a short one, because I would say that we really need to rethink the structures of schools. And I think, for example, that they shouldn't be seen as something separate in community. I think they should be seen as connected within community and provide spaces where teachers and students can be part of the community, at the same time learning and doing things and accepting that this is learning, and not only, I mean, this is with fun, and it's real world learning opportunities are really motivating. This is also something that we see at university when I do projects with non-governmental organizations and schools and so on. If they are really in real world context, the students are so motivated and they are working really a lot and investing, and they are engaged and so on. So I can just say we really need to rethink the structure of a school and how we think about schools in Germany.
The German context and the US context are a bit different, because in
Yes.
Germany, what we're talking about is sustainability is integrated into the curriculum. The higher up, people at the top have said, let's integrate sustainability into the curriculum. And what we see in the US is there's less movement up top, but there's movement from teachers and students. So more of a grassroots movement to say, we think this is important. And then sometimes there's a little pushback of like, well, but these aren't a part of your standards. So we're really in these two different areas. But in Germany, for example, saying we're going to positively reinforce teachers to participate in professional development. We're going to provide incentives. That would be really wonderful because we struggled to get teachers to enroll in our sustainability professional development in Germany because there aren't these positive incentives. So creating a system, you know, whether it's in Germany or the US, where it's top down and bottom up, because right now those are clashing in different ways, but in both countries.
Well, so I, I might say something. I really like this question. What responsibilities do we have? Because I think ESD is all about being aware of my responsibility. So I really like this question. And of course, as educators, we have the responsibility to ask ourselves, what kind of knowledge do we have to give? System knowledge and conceptual knowledge, not only special knowledge. And secondly, of course, the upcoming generation needs different skills to cope with the challenges of their future lives, because their future lives will be a lot different to ours right now. But I have a third aspect in mind, and that is close to what Lydia says. It connects to that. As teachers and educators, we need to work on the breach of trust that is emerging between the generations. So far, we see only tentative signs of what is sure, in my point of view, to be a very challenging generational conflict concerning climate change. So far, only a very small number of adolescents are rebelling, but that will change. That's what I think. But any educational process is built on trust. And we lost that as the old generation. That is not so much in our society to grab, but that's my opinion, that this will come. To put it somewhat drastically, we pooped on their food. Education for sustainable development also means approaching this challenge with open eyes and not misinterpreting the roots of upcoming conflicts as an individual character challenge. We face all structural problems. And I think that's also a responsibility for us as educators to make that clear when we work with pupils.
I love that. It's not an individual character challenge. That's certainly the discourse in the US. So I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, who was jumping in?
I was jumping in. I'm sorry, I talked over you.
Jen,
That wasn't
please.
intended. Yeah, I think my thoughts are kind of a summary of what was said throughout this panel, and so I appreciate all the contributions. From a higher education perspective, in sustainability, as you'll see, we are heavily concentrated on understanding the sustainability issues and framing them from a variety of perspectives, and that is very important. However, I think we also need to go the second step, as Lydia was mentioning, and really think about how we can co-create solutions to those sustainability challenges and what research approaches lend themselves to investigate solutions and then test them out and implement them. And to really go full circle from developing a solution as a thought product that's kind of evidence-based to testing it out on the ground, and then potentially, if it works, developing it further, requires that we have these partnerships. And again, panelists were speaking to partnerships between schools or universities and the communities by which we are hosted. And so how can we really develop these partnerships that they are mutually beneficial? That is a question, but it remains a question. We talk about this a lot, and it becomes more and more important, because only then can we really do the full circle of solution-oriented research and practice, because we can test it. And this then takes me to Catherine's point about cross-generational learning, collaboration and decision making, and we talked about the opportunities and challenges to fully engage with this, and it involves obviously the social emotional learning. And how do I do this as an educator, that I kind of train myself. I'm becoming aware of my positionality and what that means, what I contribute and what I fail to contribute. And then how do I engage in the social emotional learning context with my students, and also think of pedagogies that balance worry and hope. Yeah, so a solution-oriented perspective requires partnership and requires that we enable ourselves individually and collectively to engage with those.
Thank you. Julia put in the chat a query for questions or comments. If you're welcome to type a question into the chat, or you can type a Q and we'll call on you. I have a follow-up while we're waiting. People have questions. So I'm wondering, what are the implications for teacher professional development then? How do you all think about working with teachers around these issues?
Yeah, I can take this one. So
Lydia?
one of the things that, oh, Lydia, were you going?
No, who's
All
going?
good, Erin.
Sorry.
All good.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
Okay, sorry. Erin.
So one of the things that was discussed earlier was we can't sort of do it alone. It's not about the individual. So for teacher professional development, one of the things that was part of the Sustainability Teachers Academy model in the US, Germany, Ireland, Mexico is that teachers need to attend in teams. You can't be the sole teacher doing it alone for your school. And it's really better if you're attending in teams with somebody from a different subject. So it is interdisciplinary and it is integrated. So that's just a very concrete, like, this is how we're running PD from this point on. But then sort of more broadly, I think we think about sustainability, professional development, and teacher professional development to have these parts where, first off, we give them very translatable activities that they can take right away into their classroom, but we also build out longer PDs so that they can have a transformational experience where they apply theory and make it their own. And often PD is like this one day, one-off, short type of program. And to allow the space for the teachers to bring their expertise and to create as part of their professional development hours is really important as well.
Thanks. Those are great suggestions. Yeah.
And perhaps, thank you, Erin. This were the points that I would have also mentioned at that point, for example. Perhaps I like to add that we need to make them passionate about the questions related to sustainability, to be emotionally engaged, to see the relationships to their everyday practice, to the questions the students raise. So I think this is also very important to see that this is relevant for the target group they have in front and later on, I mean, in higher ed, but also on primary level, secondary school level. And they need to be prepared for that emotionally also, as we have already discussed. So to be aware of that they cannot solve everything, they cannot solve every question. This is sometimes very uncomfortable for teachers because they are trained to know everything and to provide the relevant knowledge or strategies or whatever. And I think at least it's also about being okay with not having the solution and the knowledge about everything. And I think that's one of the main challenges that I hear often when we trying to convince or just discuss with teachers why or where do you see approaches in your subject and so on. And you often hear that this is not their comfort zone anymore. It's going beyond their comfort zone. And but we need to provide something that makes them passionate about that. So I think that's perhaps something where we also need to reflect on higher education, learning environments, and yeah. And I think it's always connected to let's say, yeah, meetings, personal meetings, but also, let's say, excursions or whatever, going outside to be really in the environment and to delve deep into the environment. And yeah, also meet people and discuss with them, that's sometimes very easy, but yeah, makes them reflect a little where their point is, where their point of view is, just as an addition here.
We've got a couple questions in the chat. So the first question is, one of the big challenges I see in bringing about the individual and institutional changes we need to integrate ESD is to align everyone's different worldviews. What do you see as the biggest challenge in achieving this? Thank you, Alejandro, for the question.
Maybe
Yes.
I would make a start.
Sure.
I was wondering that the person is asking about the biggest challenge, because I think it is the challenge to align everyone's different worldviews. Maybe in this process, the obstacle is that we are trained that there is only one right point of view in our worldview. And I make the experience that often problems are discussed as problems of values, but they aren't really. And if you take the human rights, I'm not really answering the question. I'm just trying to give a solution. If you confer to the human rights, so many problems which seemed to be problems of different worldviews are not problems of worldviews anymore. And you can get along with very different lifestyles, point of views. There are, of course, borders, I know, but that is something that helps me.
Did anyone else want to jump in? We have another question then from Alfred. Thank you, Alfred. I have realized the use of competitions to increase awareness about education for sustainable development. How helpful are these competitions to help students provide real solutions to challenges on the ground? Any thoughts on competitions?
Seen a lot of these at the primary school level, actually. And I think if they're really about saying, let's give everybody a platform and a voice, which sometimes there are these art competitions, draw about how soil is important to you and enter this art competition. I think that can be empowering, that a whole bunch of adults and, hundreds of people are looking at the art of a 6-year-old. But I'm not sure competition overall is the right avenue. Sometimes when it happens in higher education, like at the university here, it causes negative unintended consequences. Like if the dorms are battling for who can produce the least amount of waste for the month, sometimes a student will sneak over into the other dorm and increase the waste in that other dorm. So like just being careful that there aren't negative unintended consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Often the competition becomes the thing rather than the actual point of the competition. Yes. Sort of Max Weber approach, right? Bureaucracy becomes the thing, competition becomes the thing. Yes, go ahead.
I'll only add one more thing, because I think the points Erin made are really important, is that I think competitions can be a starting point, but they does not help in the question of how can we in the long term implement ESD. I mean, some competitions are trying to focus on, how can we support longer term change or whole institution approaches or whatever. But I think at least we need to be careful about that, that it can be an entry point, but not the long-term solution. So perhaps just as a motivating environment, and then seeing, okay, how can we transfer that later on in, structures or regular activities or whatever.
And Katja did, going back to our question, the previous question, I wanted to let it point out, and you will probably open up the chat so you know what's going on, that Katja did add a couple links on professional development, which I think teacher professional development, which look to be very helpful. We have another question from David. Is there a way to present sustainability through the subject we teach itself rather than an add-on? For instance, in the question of war, or how our immune system is designed to fight invaders, or how we metabolize. So how do we weave these conversations?
Maybe I can take the first step, and then the panel can come to my support. This is an excellent question, and it's kind of a litmus test, and I'm really appreciative that you bring it up, David. I would say yes, we can, and the lens of the key competencies of sustainability provides one avenue how to explain it. And I give you a short example. So, for example, if we think of war, we can explore what are the impacts of war, and then this is going to sound a little bit almost, no, yeah. We ask what are the impacts, and there are negative impacts, and we know them, and we can list them out along a social dimension, an environmental and economic dimension, and we can map out who is negatively impacted by these adverse effects of war. And this helps us identify the stakeholders, the individuals, the communities that we need to take into consideration. And then you can also ask what are the positive impacts of war, because something must be there, otherwise it would go away. And so again, along the social, economic, and environmental dimension, you can map out who benefits, what are the benefits, and who benefits. And again, you can map out the stakeholders. And then we can go a next step further in identifying what causes these adverse effects that create harm, and what causes the, in quotation mark, positive effects. Again, because some people must, and we notice the industrial military complex is hugely benefiting from the industry of war. So we can identify the actions that lead to those outcomes. And again, we can identify who and what is behind those actions. It's people, it's institutions, it's in-depth, inert processes. And from there, we can go even a step deeper down to the root causes. And some of the root causes lie within our assumptions, our motivations, our value systems, as we had discussed it. And with this, we can think about war as a sustainability problem, understanding it in its complexity across different dimensions, the social, economic, environmental dimension, from a local level to the global scale, also, and in a temporal perspective, where are we now, where do we come from, and where might we go in the future? And I think that's where then the flip side of sustainability comes in, when we think about the future and we use sustainability values such as intergenerational justice, social justice, or the social ecological integrity, and we think about what would the world look like where we would flip the adverse effects and the suffering, and what would it need to go to this world. So we can create a sustainability informed vision and think about strategies to transform this, drawing on this very complex analysis we did of understanding war through a sustainability lens. So maybe I end it here, and I look to Erin to maybe, because you're familiar with that kind of framing, to maybe complement it through the lens of K through 12, because I'm kind of limited by my perspective on higher education.
I'm happy to. I actually was sort of diagramming and thinking about what you were saying. And you're spot on, like taking the competencies approach of systems thinking and the concept of war, for example, with K-12 teachers or students, you could do something as basic as like a fishbone diagram, where you have like the central problem of war at the head, and then the little bones, and what are the contributing causes, and where are those intervention points. And then you're getting into topics like power and privilege and resource and equity. And with teachers, you can have them building concept maps. In some of the PD research that I'm working on, we're using now concept maps as a way to evaluate teachers' holistic learning of sustainability, because we're saying, well, we're systems diagramming, and how many points and nodes and solutions and stakeholders do the teachers list in their concept maps before the PD and after the PD. So this is sustainability, and this is sustainability pedagogical content knowledge as well, bringing these concepts of systems thinking to life through the pedagogy.
We don't have any more questions. Oh, Alejandro has a question. Alejandro, would you like to ask your question? I don't know how, if I have to do anything. Julia, do we have to do? Okay, here we go.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the answer, Catherine, of my question before. Another one is about the transformation. So if we read the ESD for 2030 roadmap, the call is to transform the education. And in this topic, that is to be the big topic, how must be changed or transformed firstly, the systems or the individuals? Because a couple of studies shows that the velocity that in our Anthropocene era to destroy the limits of the planet is faster than that the individuals' actions could repair. Then the answer will be, okay, the systems now, but the systems are made for humans. For you, what is the fast step to change, to drive the transformation? Thank you very much.
Maybe I make a start, because I think there are many answers for that. It's a big question. Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry that I think that there is no first. It's not a question of ESD, in my opinion. It's a question of politics. And this ESD is partly ESD means to politicalize our human being again, because we have to find new rules for our community and being together. And that is all that counts. And the rules, for the rules, we need all the individuals, and we have all to wake up because of the urgency, which Forma you were talking about. There is a connection between what has to change first, because I observe that the municipalities behave differently out of the situation that they have to have for their programs, for their steps towards a sustainable municipality. They have to have aware citizens. And so they start to make ESD programs. They start to think, to say, education is my thing. Normally, that's not the thing in Germany. Normally, it's the federal state who's doing the education, but not the municipality. And that is a first very, very little change of system, that they start taking responsibility. That is far too slow, yes, but it gives a little hint of that there is actually some change to observe in this point. I don't know, maybe it's similar in the USA, maybe you make similar observations, but I would really say this is it's clinched together, and it's not to say this is the firstly. One precisation, maybe we will not stop the climate change because we are using wooden toothbrush. You know, in that case, it's absolutely clear that's the system and absolutely not the individual. But the system is made out of the individuals.
say this is a long time debate, structure versus agency, right? So I'm actually working on a research article about household waste decisions. And when you go to the household, you can understand what people feel they have agency over, and then where the system needs to intervene. So this research is based in Mexico, actually. So, for example, people are willing to recycle, but there's no curbside recycling. So this is kind of where there's this this nexus of structure and agency need to work together to advance sustainable waste systems. With composting, we were working in an urban area with millions of people where there wasn't enough green space. So even if the individual had the desire to at-home compost, there really wasn't an appropriate avenue for them to do that. So again, that's where there maybe is some education about the importance of sustainable waste systems for climate solutions, but the system hasn't caught up at all with what could or should happen. And what's really interesting about that is then also how equity plays in. Like for people that were lower income, they would work with like their cousins or aunts and uncles to give their food scraps to the farmers, to the pigs and stuff like that. But we're seeing less of that in the US. So there's an interplay of equity, individual agency, and structural institutional systems.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think we lost Katya, but she did list, she listed the key competencies in sustainability in the chat, if folks are interested in taking note of those. We have 3 minutes left. If anybody has, any of the panelists have a final comment? This is the moment. If not, then as moderator, I guess I get to say thank you to our panelists for a really, I think, stimulating and uplifting conversation. It's rare to leave a conversation about climate change feeling energized and excited. So I so appreciate all, and I know that our all of us appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone who's joined us. I think it's been a fabulous conversation this morning.